Just as the scalpel was about to descend, the abdomen of the young girl declared dead, for organ donation stirred. At that moment, a doctor was forced to choose between 5 lives and 1 life, and this decision led him to the hospital's darkest secret. Stay with us until the end, and let's uncover this secret together. The sound of the respirator was the only noise in the white room, a mechanical breath that came and went as if the hospital itself were still trying to convince death to wait a little longer. The young woman lay there motionless, covered up to her chest with a light blue sheet, her pale, expressionless face looking as if she were in her 20s. No rings, no earrings, no bracelet, nothing to say who she was, just a body and a heavy silence that no one dared to break. Nurse Marta entered first, her eyes downcast. "Confirmed, doctor. No family, no documents," she said in a dry voice, almost a whisper. "No name?" asked Carlos Miguel without looking up. "Nothing," replied Marta. "They just called her Patient 47. He took a deep breath, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make the air feel heavier. For 2 days, they had tried everything. She had seizures and they performed CPR, stimulation, medication, but her brain was completely silent. Now the protocol said what to do. Carlos Miguel walked to the bed and looked at her face. So young, her brown hair still damp from the last bath given by the nursing team. She had a small cut near her eyebrow, already healing. 2 days fighting, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else more. And now, she's going to save other lives. The nurse discreetly wiped her eyes. The recipients are on their way. Liver, kidneys, heart, all compatible. Carlos remained silent. He was a man accustomed to death, but never completely immune to it. There was always that second of pause before touching the scalpel. That moment when he wondered if the person there, although unconscious, could still hear him. He adjusted his gloves. The sound of the latex stretching seemed louder. "Let's begin," he said in a firm voice. The surgical lights came on brightly, illuminating the room as if it were daytime. 3 assistants took their places. The monitors showed straight lines, lifeless. No signal, no heartbeat, no breath. Carlos looked once more at the face of the young woman with no one, no name, he thought. He tried to imagine her life. Did she have a mother, siblings, someone who was now praying for her without knowing where she was? But time was short. Protocol did not allow for emotions. "Median incision," he said in his usual professional tone. Marta handed him the scalpel. The blade glinted in the cold light. Carlos held it carefully, took a deep breath, and stood there still for a moment that seemed like an eternity. The sound of the clock on the wall could be heard. Tick-tock, tick. He looked once more at her motionless chest and murmured softly, as if talking to someone who was asleep, "May God's will be done, girl." Then, with steady hands, he brought the tip of the scalpel close to her skin. Outside the room, someone turned off the hallway light. The scalpel slid across the young woman's pale skin with the cold precision of someone who has repeated this gesture hundreds of times. The soft sound of the cut mingled with the constant hum of the machines. It was just another surgery, just another donor body. But then something happened. Carlos Miguel stopped. His previously steady gaze was lost on a point right there in the center of the girl's abdomen. Something moved, a small tremor, almost nothing, but real. He opened his eyes wide. They saw that. "What is it?" asked Marta, the nurse, her voice broken. He leaned over the table, the scalpel still suspended in the air. The abdomen, the muscle moved. The assistants looked at each other. One of them shrugged. "It must have been a muscle spasm, doctor. It's a post-mortem reflex." But Carlos Miguel didn't respond. He remained motionless, watching, waiting. And suddenly, another slight tremor, as if something inside wanted to say, "I'm here." The scalpel began to shake in his hand. "Wait," he murmured, taking a step back. The air in the room seemed to disappear. Carlos's eyes went straight to the monitor. The green line remained straight, steady, silent. No heartbeat, no sound. But something inside him screamed, "Something is wrong." He took off his surgical mask, sweat running down his temple. "Marta, give me a second." His hand was still on the young woman's chest. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to something very faint. "I felt it," he said firmly, opening his eyes. It wasn't a reflex. It was a breath. Marta clenched her hands nervously. Doctor, the recipients are waiting. The clock is ticking. No, Marta. I can tell the time, too. But I'm not going to cut as long as there's any doubt. Call neuro now. The resident stepped forward. With all due respect, the protocol is clear. The monitor is straight. The brain death assessment was done in the ICU. We have the report. The whole team saw it. I saw it too, said Carlos. And I just felt something that the report didn't feel. Call neuro and cardio, please. Silence. Wade. Someone sighed. Another rolled their eyes. The room, so trained to obey, seemed about to break. Marta picked up the phone with trembling hands. Neurology, we need you here. Room 3 now. Urgent. She hung up, swallowed hard, and looked at Carlos. They're on their way. The minutes seemed like hours. No one touched anything. The scalpel lay still on its side on the sterile field. The hum of the lights became a very loud noise. Carlos took 2 steps, came back, walked again, put his ear to the young woman's face just to check, then his palm on her chest, searching for that almost nothing that made him scream. Her heart was beating so hard, it seemed to fill the room. The door opened. 2 neurologists rushed in, Dr. Jimena, with large glasses and a stern expression, and Dr. Salgado, older, too calm for the moment. What do we have? Asked Jimena, already putting on her gloves. Reflex. Post-mortem, said the resident dryly. The doctor here doesn't agree. Carlos took a deep breath. I touched her chest and felt a slight murmur, and saw a contraction in her abdomen twice. Jimena went straight to the point. She shone a light in her pupils. Her pupils were fixed and unresponsive. Her voice was cold and professional. She applied painful stimulation to her fingers with no reaction. She ran her cold hand over her cornea with no reflex. She bit her lip thoughtfully. Bring the electroencephalogram machine, she said. I already ordered it, said Marta, rushing out. The cardiologist arrived shortly after, Dr. Alvaro with a portable ultrasound hanging from his shoulder. They called cardio. He tried to smile but saw the tension in the air and gave up. Let's see, he said, placing the transducer on the young woman's chest. The cold gel spread across her pale skin. He looked at the screen with a frown. No cardiac activity, he said, without spontaneous activity or breathing. Nothing I can measure, Alvaro said, looking at the monitor, a straight line just like in the report. But he says he felt a murmur, Marta commented quietly, as if confessing a secret. Alvaro looked at Carlos for a second, neither confirming nor denying, just respecting. The technicians arrived with the ECG and quickly set up the device, cables, and gel electrodes on Jimena's scalp. She watched every step like a guard. Silence, please, she asked. Any noise disturbs the room. Everyone obeyed. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. All that could be heard were the clicks of the buttons, the soft rustling of the thermal paper, and Carlos's heart beating in his chest. The needle began to move. Straight line. Bien straight line. Irsinein straight line. Carlos felt his throat close up. The technicians looked at each other. Jimena bit the cap of her pen. Alvaro crossed his arms. Suddenly, a tremor. A sawtooth so small it looked like an error. Jimena leaned in, brought her face close to the line, adjusted the gain, reduced the interference. Repeat, she said to the technicians. The line ran straight again, and then again. A noise. A short line. Another almost nothing, but there it was. It could be interference from the outlet, suggested the anxious resident, pointing to the wall. Or from the electric scalpel, even though it's turned off. Turn everything off and on, Jimena requested. Let's isolate it. They turned off the auxiliary equipment, checked the ground connection, moved the cables away, and made a new recording. The room was so quiet that the sound of the paper coming out of the machine sounded like rain. The line ran straight, 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 and then 3 timid little teeth, like 3 soft knocks on a distant door. Carlos's whole body trembled. There, the voice came out softly. There, they saw it. Jimena did not respond. She put her finger on the paper, following the trace, counting silently. Then she looked up, her eyes more human than before. It's minimal, she said carefully. Very minimal, but it's not noise. Activity? Alvaro asked. Activity, Jimena confirmed. Very low residual, but it exists. The resident shook his head in distress. That doesn't change the donation protocol. The ICU report changes everything, Carlos cut in, without shouting but with a force that filled the room. If there's activity, there's no extraction. Period. Close the incision. Now Marta put her hand to her chest and let out a, "Thank God," so sincere that it almost hurt. Let's repeat it, said Jimena, already in quiet war mode. Another trace with another device in another room, another power outlet, and I'm going to request an evoked potential. I want to review all possible responses. Notify the ICU of the immediate suspension of any donation procedures until further notice. Alvaro nodded. I'll stay close if you need a trans-esophageal echo. I'll do it, but for now I support what Neuro says. You have something, but there's the resident, now pale, looking for a way to respond. Doctor, the recipients and extraction teams. Carlos looked at the young woman, not at the papers, not at the screens, but at her. He approached her slowly, smoothed a strand of hair stuck to her forehead, like a father fixing his daughter's hair before bed. They're going to wait, he said firmly, without blinking. We owe patience to life. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever time is safe and right, but we owe it to them. Marta touched his arm gently. You are not alone, doctor. Jimena turned off the EEG and called the technicians. Let's go to the neurophysiology room now and repeat everything without a margin of error. I'm coming with you, said Carlos. No need, replied Jimena. Trust me, I'll call you from the hallway. With the first stroke, he took a deep breath. I trust you, but I'm staying here by your side. The team began to move. They adjusted cables, checked adhesives, cleared the way. No one argued. There was something new in that room. Respect. Not for a title, not for a rule, but for a near whisper that refused to disappear. Before leaving, Alvaro stood next to Carlos. You know they're going to question you. I know. Carlos ran his hand over his face, tired and alive at the same time. Ask them whatever they want. What I'm not going to do is keep quiet about what I felt. The oldest neurologist, Dr. Salgado, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke in a low, soft voice. Sometimes the body says it's over, but the spark inside says wait. Today, I heard yours. Carlos nodded with tears in his eyes that he didn't let fall. The stretcher began to move slowly toward the new room. The cables swayed, the wheels squeaked, and the corridor seemed longer than ever. Carlos walked alongside, one hand holding the bed rail as if protecting it. Halfway there, Jimena answered her cell phone, listened to something from her team, and gave Carlos a short signal. No show, just truth. The first repeated trace confirmed it. She said simply and clearly, minimal brain activity. Carlos closed his eyes for a second, as if giving thanks without words. When he opened them, his gaze was firm. Minimal, he repeated in a whisper that was a prayer, but it exists. The room was still full of voices and hurried footsteps, monitors being reconnected, cables changed, orders coming and going in short tones. The atmosphere was tense, but it was no longer as it had been before. Now there was hope, small but alive. Carlos Miguel watched from a distance, his eyes fixed on the young woman, while the team prepared the new equipment to keep her stable. He took a deep breath, trying to control the mixture of fear and relief. The girl was so fragile. She seemed to be fighting an invisible battle between life and death. Presque dur, 38. Or 70. Saturation rising, said Marta, looking at the monitor. She's reacting to stimuli, doctor. Very slowly, but she is reacting. Carlos just nodded. His whole body was shaking, but inside, his heart was beating differently. It was as if the whole hospital was watching that bed. Meanwhile, a new assistant with a shy look was arranging the clothes that had arrived with the patient. A pair of jeans torn at the knee, a blouse stained with dried blood, an old sneaker without a lace. She moved things slowly without saying anything, just trying to fold and put away what she could, until something fell to the floor. A small piece of crumpled paper, folded in 4. Doctor, she called hesitantly. There's something here. Carlos approached, still wearing his gloves, and picked up the paper carefully. It was small, about the size of a palm. He unfolded it slowly. The folds were dirty with dirt, the edges wet, as if someone had squeezed it in desperation. The letters were crooked and shaky, written in blue pen. My name is Gabriela. I have no one but him. If something happens, don't leave me alone. Time stood still. Carlos stared at those words for several seconds. The noise of the machines faded into the distance, as if he had stepped inside his own chest. Gabriela murmured in a tone that sounded like an apology. Marta approached, drying her hands on her apron. That was her name. He just nodded, unable to speak. His voice wouldn't come out. It was as if every letter on the paper weighed a ton. Don't leave me alone, he repeated inside himself like a cry. Poor thing, said the assistant in a low voice. She didn't even take out the paper. Just this. Carlos ran his fingers over the paper as if caressing a memory. The shaky handwriting showed fear, perhaps pain, or both. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his coat pocket. Now you have a name, Carlos said, his voice breaking. Marta tried to smile, but her eyes were already filled with tears. What a beautiful name. Carlos looked at her face again. The same cold skin, the same still body, but now with a name, she felt different. She was no longer a nameless patient. She was a person, a story, a request. He approached the bed and stood there, looking at that peaceful, almost childlike face. The lights reflected off her pale skin, and for a moment he thought he saw her chest move slightly, almost imperceptibly. Gabriela said in a trembling voice, Now I know who you are. No one answered, only the soft sound of the monitor and the air conditioner whispering on the ceiling. He leaned down and lowered his face until it was close to her ear. He spoke softly, as if talking to someone who had been asleep for a long time. Gabriela, you're not going to die alone, I swear. The phrase came out broken, as if it had to pass through a lump in his throat before becoming sound. For a moment the world stopped, and then something small and impossible happened. A single, slow tear rolled down her left eye. Marta choked. Doctor, Carlos saw it. He saw it and couldn't believe it. He stood still, watching that drop roll down her skin until it disappeared into the sheet. He listened. He whispered somehow. He listened. No one said anything else, nor was it necessary in that silence full of life. Everyone understood the same thing. The nameless girl was no longer alone. The clock on the wall read almost 10 p.m. when Carlos Miguel was called to the office. He was still wearing his stained gown, his face tired, his whole body tense. That day had been a whirlwind, and all he wanted was to sit in silence next to the young woman who now had a name. But the intercom rang 3 times. Dr. Carlos, the director wants to see you now. The hallway was empty, the floor gleaming under the cold lights. With each step, the sound of his shoes could be heard, as if the entire hospital were listening. When he entered the office, the director was already waiting for him, standing behind his desk with his arms crossed. Close the door, Dr. Herrera. Carlos obeyed. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with something that was about to explode. I just received a call from the transplant center, said the director in a cold, overly controlled tone. Do you know how many people were waiting for that donor's organs? Carlos looked down. I know. 5 lives, doctor. 5. The director raised his voice. The liver, the kidneys, the heart, the lungs. Everything was ready. The ambulances were already on their way. And you just canceled it. I suspended it, Carlos replied, trying not to get upset until we were sure. Sure. The director laughed, but without joy. We had reports. We had studies. You wanted to be the hero. Carlos looked up. I felt a sigh. A sigh. The director slammed the table in anger. You ruined months of work by an entire team for a sigh. The doctor took a deep breath. For a moment he thought about keeping quiet, but he couldn't. She wasn't dead. The director approached slowly. His voice lowered but became harsher. You're forgetting where you work. Here we follow protocols, and protocols, Dr. Herrera, are not up for discussion. Carlos clenched his hands behind his back. His whole body was shaking, but his voice came out firm. And if the protocol is wrong, the silence was so deep you could hear the ticking of the clock. The director looked him up and down, as if seeing him for the first time. "You know what's going to happen now," he said with contained anger. "They're going to open an investigation. They're going to review every decision you made, and in the end it's all going to fall on you. I tried to warn you." Carlos looked down, tired. "If that's the price for doing the right thing, I'll pay it." "Right," the director exploded. "The right thing was to save 5 people who may now die." Carlos looked at him and replied calmly, "She cried." The director stood still. "What did I say? She cried?" Carlos took a step forward. A tear rolled down his cheek. "I saw it." The man looked at him without saying anything. His jaw trembled, but his pride prevented him from speaking. "Go home, doctor," he said finally, turning his back on him. "Tomorrow the commission will decide what to do with you." Carlos nodded without arguing and left the office silently. In the hallway, the sounds of the hospital surrounded him again. Monitors, footsteps, whispers. Life passed by the window, and he saw that rain begin to fall. A quiet, almost sad rain. He walked to Gabriela's room. The lights were dim. Marta was asleep in a chair, and the monitor blinked slowly and steadily. The young woman remained motionless, but her face looked calmer. Carlos approached and whispered, "Hang in there, Gabriela. Don't let them win." Dawn fell heavily on the hospital. The lights in the hallway flickered from time to time, and the sound of the rain outside made time feel as if it had stopped. In the reception area, the employee on duty was fighting sleep when the automatic door opened with a click. A tall man in a dark suit entered, a closed umbrella in his hand. His face was pale, almost colorless. He spoke softly in a hoarse voice. "Good evening." The receptionist sat up straight. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you? I'm looking for a patient named Gabriela." The woman frowned. Her brow. "Gabriela? We have several. What is her last name?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Just Gabriela. She was hit by a car 2 days ago." The receptionist looked at the screen. "Oh, yes. The young woman who arrived without identification. She's in intensive care, but visiting hours are over." The man took a brown envelope out of his pocket. It was somewhat crumpled. "I'm not here to visit her. I just need to drop this off. It's important." She took the envelope, curious. "Can I tell who it's for?" Left it. He hesitated, his dark eyes seeming heavy. "Just give it to the doctor in charge." Yes, it's Dr. Carlos Miguel Herrera." The man nodded. "Tell him not to delay." Before she could ask what he meant by that, he was already leaving. He walked to the door, opened his umbrella, and went out. The automatic door closed with a soft sound. The receptionist looked at the envelope. It had no name or return address, just a small symbol in the corner, something resembling a hand-drawn letter D. She stood up and looked out the window. The man was gone, not even a shadow or a footprint, nothing but the fine rain covering the courtyard and the distant sound of thunder in the sky above Puebla. She swallowed, pressed the envelope against her chest, and murmured, "How strange." At that very moment, in the silent ICU room, Carlos looked at Gabriela and noticed something different. The monitor remained stable. The rain beat against the glass, and for a moment, he felt that they were not alone. The envelope remained untouched on the table for hours. Carlos Miguel did not have the courage to open it. The brown paper seemed to breathe on its own, as if it held something inside that would change everything. Dawn had already turned to morning when he finally sat down alone in the small room next to the intensive care unit. The coffee was cold, his body tired, but his mind too alert to rest. He picked up the envelope. It was light, but it felt as if he were carrying a stone. He carefully removed the seal. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and an old, worn photograph with torn corners. In the photo, a girl of about 6 years old smiled at the camera, wearing a simple dress and a red ribbon in her hair. Next to her was a woman in a wheelchair with a blanket over her legs and a tired but tender smile. Time had faded the colors, but not the look in her eyes. Between 02:01, a bond of love that the world cannot break. Carlos stared at it for several seconds. He turned the photo over and saw, written in blue ink and shaky letters, "Gabriela and Mom." His heart sank. Gabriela, so small, so full of life, and now there, fighting to stay alive. With trembling hands, he opened the letter. The paper was thin and yellowed, with edges damp from the previous night's rain. The letters were crooked, as if someone had written in a hurry, in fear. She ran away, but they still love her. Protect my daughter. Shame them. She read it once, twice, 3 times. Every word was a blow. She ran away. They still love her. Who were they and who was she? Her mind began to race. She ran away from what? From whom? Why would someone leave a mysterious envelope in the early hours of a rainy morning in a hospital for a girl who had almost had her organs removed while still alive? The doctor rested his head in his hands. The body could take no more, but the heart insisted. My God, what have I gotten myself into? He muttered to himself. Marta entered slowly, carrying a tray. Doctor, I brought you some fresh coffee. He looked up. Marta handed him the photo. Look at this. She took the picture, squinting to see better. It's her, right? The girl is Gabriela, yes. She pointed to the woman in the wheelchair. And this must be the mother. Marta turned around, the paper, and read the back, then the letter. They still want her, she repeated, frightened. Who are they? Carlos shook his head. I don't know, but someone came here in the early morning to leave this and disappeared. Marta was silent for a moment, then whispered, So you're not alone in the world. He took a deep breath. Maybe not, but if this letter is true, whatever she ran away from is not over yet. They both looked out the window. Outside, the sun was beginning timidly, painting the sky orange. Below, the hospital courtyard was still wet from the night's rain. The world seemed peaceful, but inside that room, there was a secret beating alive, like the heart of someone trying to keep breathing against all odds. Carlos turned the photo over again and ran his thumb over the smiling girl's face. Where did you go, Gabriela? He murmured, and stood there in silence with the letter in his hand, and the weight of a mystery that was beginning to open like a wound. He still didn't know who she was, or what it meant. They still loved her, but he did know one thing. That young woman was not just a nameless patient. She had a past, and somehow that past had just knocked on the hospital door asking for protection. The images from the CT scan slowly appeared on the screen, Y1 in shades of gray. The sound of the computer fan mixed with the soft hum of the equipment in the intensive care unit. Carlos Miguel stood with his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the screen. Next to him, the radiologist, a quiet and experienced man, moved the mouse carefully, enlarging every detail of Gabriela's body. Here, said the radiologist, pointing. Look at these marks on the left femur. An old, poorly healed fracture. Carlos approached. Old? How long ago? Hard to say. Months, maybe more than a year. She was treated without surgery. The man sighed, as if she had been immobilized at home. Anyway, Carlos touched his chin and said, And these marks on the abdomen. The technician enlarged the image. There, clearly visible, were thin, crooked, poorly done scars. Some looked like old cuts, others more recent. There are several, said the radiologist, and they are not from hospital surgery. No clean pattern. He looked at Carlos seriously. This was done in very poor conditions. The silence lingered. The cold light of the room was reflected on their faces. Carlos felt his stomach tighten. Each new detail revealed a hidden story, a pain that no one had seen. Wait, murmured the radiologist. Here, look at this area of the uterus. He adjusted the focus and increased the contrast. There are signs of recent distension. Carlos frowned. Distension? The man hesitated, searching for words. It's typical of a recent birth, perhaps weeks or even days before the accident. The doctor felt the air leaving him. For a second, she had a baby. The radiologist nodded slowly. Everything indicates that she did. Carlos took 2 steps back, putting his hand to his head. His heart was beating fast. My God, he murmured, and no one said anything. The man shook his head. There was no record, no history, no file, no document. Carlos leaned against the cold wall. So on top of everything else, this girl had a broken body, stitched up, and she had just given birth. His voice came out broken for a moment. The radiologist said nothing, just looked at the screen with a sad expression. Doctor, Marta called, entering the room slowly. You have to see this. She was holding a printed sheet of paper, her hands trembling. Her blood pressure dropped again, but had stabilized. But when I checked the old file sent by the police, there's nothing about pregnancy. Nothing, as if it had never happened. Carlos took the paper, looked at it, and then looked at her seriously. Then where is the baby, Marta? She swallowed hard. I don't know, doctor. No one knows. Silence filled the room again. All that could be heard was the beeping of the monitor in the hallway. Carlos looked at the screen once more, focusing his eyes on the scars that marked the young woman's body. Each line was a silent memory, a cry for help. She survived something very strong, he said, almost in a whisper, and no one saw it. Marta approached with her eyes full of tears. What are we going to? We're going to do whatever it takes to find out what happened, he replied. But first she has to live. The next day, the atmosphere in the hospital changed. The hallway on the 8th floor felt colder, more tense. Carlos noticed the strange looks, the whispers. Something was wrong. At lunchtime, he was called back to the administration office. 3 men were waiting for him: the director, a hospital lawyer, and a member of the medical committee. Dr. Herrera began, the director said in a serious voice. The board reviewed the reports and decided to maintain the previous report. Carlos frowned. What report? The brain death report, replied the lawyer, pushing a piece of paper toward him. There was a procedural error. None of the new tests are officially valid. Carlos felt his blood boil. What do you mean? You saw the images. He has minimal brain activity, but he has it. The director remained firm. It was a technical failure. The protocol was not followed properly, and to avoid legal problems, we need to close the case. Carlos took a step forward. By closing the case, you mean you want to declare him dead again? The hospital needs to protect itself, said the lawyer firmly. If this becomes public, it will be a scandal. Carlos took a deep breath. His heart was pounding, and the air burned his chest. The scandal, doctor, is killing someone who is alive. The director stood up, losing his patience. Be careful what you say. Herrera is turning against the hospital. I'm on the side of the truth, he replied. The lawyer tried to calm things down, but it was too late. The atmosphere was tense. You have to understand that there are lives waiting for those organs, insisted the director, and an entire institution depends on trust in the protocol. Carlos looked him in the eye. And who trusts me? Who trusts her? The man looked down. Carlos took the report, crumpled it in his hands, and threw it on the table. If you want to hide this, hide it. But don't count on me. He stormed out, slamming the door, the sound echoing down the hallway. That same afternoon, he sat in his car, took a deep breath, and turned on the recorder on his cell phone. My name is Dr. Carlos Miguel Herrera. I am a transplant surgeon at the General Hospital of Puebla, and what they are trying to do here is a crime. His voice trembled, but he sounded determined. He recorded everything, the tests, the results, the girl's note, the photo. Then he sent it to a journalist friend. Hours later, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Websites, radio stations, television stations. The story spread like wildfire. A young woman was going to be declared dead, so her organs could be donated. The whole country began to talk about it on social media. Photos of the intensive care unit circulated. Carlos's name was everywhere. Inside the hospital, chaos reigned. The director shouted orders. The guards closed the doors. Reporters tried to get in, but none of that mattered anymore. Carlos, exhausted, looked out the window of the room where it all began. Outside, the sun was setting, and inside the room, Gabriela was still breathing weakly, silently, but alive. He rested his forehead against the glass and murmured to himself, "Now everyone will know, Gabriela. No one else will erase you." Night had fallen heavily on the hospital. The parking lot was almost empty, with only a few cars scattered under the yellow light from the streetlights. The distant sound of an ambulance mingled with the cold wind blowing through the trees. Carlos Miguel finished his shift, his body tired and his soul in pieces. He walked slowly, his coat hanging from his arm, his face marked by the exhaustion and tension of the last few days. Each step echoed on the wet ground. He looked up at the sky. There were no stars, only dark clouds and heavy air, as if it knew a storm was still coming. He opened the trunk of his car, threw his briefcase inside, and stood still for a moment, breathing. He wanted to believe that everything was going to work out, but something inside him said it wasn't over yet. That's when he heard quick, steady footsteps coming from behind. He turned slowly. 2 men were approaching, dressed in dark clothes with serious faces. One wore a cap, the other a leather jacket. Neither seemed to be a hospital employee. "Can I help you?" Carlos asked, trying to remain calm. The man in the cap smiled a little. "I think it's the other way around, doctor. We're here to help you stop getting involved in this." Carlos felt his stomach turn cold. Getting involved in what? The other man, the one in the jacket, stepped forward. His voice was hoarse and cold. "That girl, Gabriela, forget her. She's not yours." Carlos let out a short, nervous laugh. "It's nobody's." The man in the cap moved closer, no longer smiling. "You don't understand, doctor. There are important people involved. People who don't want any scandals." Carlos crossed his arms firmly. "And you think I'm going to pretend I didn't see what I saw? That I'm going to let someone die just so everything looks good on paper? Sometimes it's better for everyone," said the man in the jacket in an almost calm tone. "Less pain, less trouble." Carlos took a step back, suspiciously. "What are you? Police guards?" The man in the cap laughed half-heartedly. "We're the warning you should listen to before everything gets worse." The wind blew harder. The leaves on the ground swirled noisily. The parking lot, now so empty, looked like a field full of shadows. Carlos felt his heart racing, but he didn't move. "I'm not going to stop," he said firmly. "She's alive, and I'm not going to let them kill her again." The man in the jacket looked at him angrily. "So that's what you're going to do? Throw away your career for a simple girl?" Carlos took a deep breath. "She's not a simple girl. She's someone." The first man moved closer. "I warned you." Before Carlos could move, he felt the blow to his face, a sharp punch to the head. His head spun, his body staggered, and he fell to his knees on the floor. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. The second man grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and spoke very close to him. "Drop the case, doctor. That girl doesn't deserve to live." Carlos spat blood on the floor. He looked up at him, and even though his face was swollen, he smiled a small, crooked smile, but one full of truth. "Now," he said in a hoarse voice, "now I'm sure she should live." The two looked at each other angrily. One pushed the doctor, who fell to the side, gasping for air. Then they walked away, slowly, disappearing into the darkness between the cars. Carlos remained lying there on the cold ground, breathing with difficulty. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth. His eye throbbed. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the wind blow on his face. The pain was strong, but there was something stronger than that. Certainty. That attack only proved what he already felt. Gabriela was not just a patient. Someone wanted to silence the truth. He got up with effort, staggering, wiped the blood with the back of his hand, and laughed again, alone in the middle of the empty parking lot. "So that's how it is," he muttered. "If they tried to silence me, it's because she has to live." He got into the car, turned on the lights, and stared at the hospital in the distance. The illuminated windows seemed to watch over the night, and in the midst of that heavy silence, Carlos Miguel made a promise only to himself. As long as he breathed, no one else would lay a finger on Gabriela. The morning began slowly, with the sun timidly entering through the cracks in the ICU window. The air smelled of disinfectant and hope. Gabriela had been there for days, between sleep and silence, while the entire hospital seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a sign from her. Carlos Miguel sat beside her with deep, dark circles under his eyes and a cold coffee in his hands. He no longer knew how many hours he had slept. He just waited in silence. Then he heard something, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a sigh. He quickly looked at the monitor. It was still the same, but her chest moved. Marta called out, jumping up. She breathed differently. The nurse ran over, her eyes wide. "Calm down, doctor. Calm down." She touched the young woman's face. "Gabriela, can you hear me?" Her fingers trembled slowly, very slowly. Her eyelids began to open. Carlos stood motionless, his heart beating fast in his chest. Gabriela whispered with a trembling voice, "It's me, Dr. Carlos. You're safe." Her eyes opened completely. She blinked several times, trying to understand where she was. The lights, the white ceiling, the sound of the machines. Everything seemed strange to her. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. "Calm down," he said, moving closer. "You're alive. Everything is fine." She blinked slowly, her lips moving weakly. Marta grabbed a small glass of water, wet a cotton ball, and placed it on her dry lips. Gabriela swallowed with difficulty, her eyes filled with tears. Then her voice came out low and hoarse, almost a broken whisper. "My son." Carlos frowned, not understanding what she meant. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and repeated, "Where is my son?" His heart froze. She remembered. Gabriela began, but her voice broke. "You had a son." She turned her face away, tears falling. "They took him away from me at birth," she said, crying softly. "They told me he died, but I didn't believe them." Carlos felt a lump in his throat. He remained silent, looking at this broken young woman who barely had the strength to breathe, but was still crying for a son who might no longer be alive. He took her hand gently. "Gabriela, listen," he said softly, almost in a whisper. "I promise you, we're going to find out what happened." She slowly opened her eyes and looked at him with a mixture of fear and faith, and nodded her head. "Don't leave him alone." Carlos squeezed her hand tighter. "I won't. I swear." In the days that followed, the case grew bigger. The press wouldn't leave the hospital alone. Reporters, cameras, questions. And in the midst of it all, a new clue appeared. An anonymous tip from a woman in the interior talking about a hidden orphanage where babies were taken without being registered. Carlos didn't think twice. He took the car and left. The road was long and dirt. The gray sky promised rain. On the radio, the news talked about the scandal, but he hardly listened. He only thought about Gabriela and what she had said. "They took him away from me." When he arrived, the gate was half open. It was an old house with peeling paint and a smell of dampness. A makeshift sign read, "Home of Hope." He knocked again, until a woman came out with her hair tied back, a dirty apron, and a nervous look on her face. "I'm looking for some information," Carlos said, trying to speak calmly. "I'm a doctor. I'm looking for a child born a few months ago." The woman looked him up and down. "We only take care of abandoned children here, sir." "Abandoned or stolen?" he asked firmly. She froze for a second, fear visible in her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, taking a step back. Carlos realized his heart was racing, was beating fast. "Please," he said more quietly, "I don't want any trouble. I just want to know if there's a baby here, the son of a young woman named Gabriela." The woman hesitated, bit her lip, and looked back as if she were afraid someone would hear her. Then she motioned for him to come into the hallway. It smelled of sour milk and cheap disinfectant. Babies could be heard crying in the distance. The woman walked to a small room and pointed to a wooden crib. They said the mother died in an accident. No one came for him. Carlos approached the crib. A baby slept wrapped in a blue blanket. He had fair skin, dark hair, and a small dimple on his cheek. When he bent down to get a better look, the baby opened his big, curious brown eyes, the same color as Gabriela's. The doctor gasped. "My God." The baby stretched out his little hand and touched his finger with a soft, warm, living touch. Carlos felt tears welling up. "It's the same one," he murmured. "The one in the photo. The same smile. It's his son, without a doubt." The woman looked at him confused. "What photo?" But he didn't answer. He took out his cell phone and pulled up the photo he had in his wallet. An old photo of Gabriela as a child with her mother. The baby smiled just like her. The same sweet, crooked smile she had in the photo. Carlos couldn't hold back the tears. He lowered his head, rested his forehead on the crib, and let out a loud, sincere cry, like someone who finally understands what life has always been trying to say. "We found you, little one," he whispered. "Your mom waited for you, and I'm not going to leave her alone." Outside, it started to rain, but inside that room, for the first time in a long time, there was warmth, a tired doctor, a baby with brown eyes, and the weight of a promise fulfilled, that Gabriela would never alone. The rain was still falling softly when Carlos Miguel returned to the hospital. The car moved along the bumpy road, and in the back seat, the baby slept wrapped in a blue blanket. He looked in the rearview mirror the whole time, as if to make sure that little miracle was still there. When he arrived, it was already dawn. The parking lot was empty, and thunder rumbled in the distance. He entered through the back without knocking, his heart beating fast. In the ICU, Gabriella was sleeping, her breathing weak, her face calm. Marta was dozing in a chair next to her. Carlos opened the door slowly. The baby let out a small whimper. Marta woke up immediately. "Doctor," she whispered, frightened. "Did you bring him? Is he her baby?" Carlos put a finger to his lips, asking for silence. "Yes," he replied softly. "He's your son." Marta's eyes filled with tears. "My God." He approached the bed, looked at Gabriella, and took a deep breath. Carlos said softly, "Wake up. There's someone who wants to see you." The young woman moved slowly, her eyes opening slowly. Confused, she blinked, trying to understand what was happening. Carlos leaned over and showed her the baby. For a second, she had no reaction. She looked at him in disbelief, then brought her hands to her mouth. She whispered, her voice breaking, "No, it can't be." The baby moved and began to cry, that loud, pure cry that breaks any mother's heart. Gabriella stretched out her arms, trembling. Carlos placed the baby in her arms with all the care in the world, and then time stood still. She hugged him to her chest, crying as if she were coming back to life. "My son," she repeated between sobs. "My son." The baby, as if he understood, stopped crying and rested his little face on her chest. A small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, the same smile in the old photo, the same smile that crossed time to prove that love never dies. Marta cried silently with her hand on her chest. Carlos just watched with tears in his eyes. "He waited for you," Gabriella said emotionally, "and you waited for him." She looked up at him with tears running down her face, too weak even to speak. "Thank you for not giving up, for not leaving me alone." He smiled, holding back his emotion. "It was what I promised. Remember?" She felt it, unable to respond, and just kissed her son's forehead and closed her eyes as if giving thanks to heaven. Hours later, as the day began to dawn, Carlos was called to the records room. There, sitting in the dim light, was a woman he had never seen before, with an aged face, sunken eyes, and simple clothes. She was holding a handkerchief and an envelope similar to the first one. "Are you Dr. Herrera?" she asked in a tired voice. "Yes, and you are?" She looked at him and replied softly, "I'm a friend of Diana's." He froze. "You left the letter." She said she knew Gabriella's mother, clutching the handkerchief in her hands. "Her name was Diana. We worked together many years ago in a shelter. When she got sick, she made me promise that if anything happened, I would take care of the girl." "But what happened?" he asked, surprised. The woman took a deep breath. They were living in hiding. Diana knew that there were people interested in her daughter because of something she saw at the shelter, something dirty related to illegal adoptions. One day they fled. Shortly after, she sent me the photo and the letter and disappeared. Carlos felt his skin crawl, and the baby. When I found out that Gabriella was pregnant, I tried to find her, but it was too late. He looked down. I kept checking the records, waiting for an opportunity to help her. When I saw on television that a young woman with no name was going to donate her organs, I knew it was her. That's why I left the envelope. The doctor was silent for a few seconds. Her words hurt and healed at the same time. "You saved her life." The woman smiled sadly. "No, doctor. You saved her. I just left the message." Carlos tried to thank her, but she was already getting up. "Give Gabriella and that child a new opportunity far from here." He felt moved. "I will." The woman put her hand on his shoulder. "You did what few would have the courage to do, and that's why there is still hope in the world." She walked slowly away, disappearing down the hallway, as if time were erasing her again. When Carlos returned to the ICU, Gabriella still had the baby in her arms. The open window let in the wind, and the sheet moved gently. She opened her eyes and whispered, "Who was that?" "A friend of your mom's," he replied. "She took care of you, too." Gabriella smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "So you kept your promise." Carlos nodded. "Now it's your turn." She looked at the baby, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "We'll never be alone again." The doctor stood watching for a moment in silence, feeling that something was ending and something else was beginning in that room. Between tears and the morning light, life was settling back into place. The past was saying goodbye, and love was staying. The wind blew softly that morning, making the dry leaves dance across the square. The shy sun passed through the trees and illuminated Gabriella's face, now dressed in simple but clean clothes. In her arms, she held the baby, her son, who slept peacefully with his little face pressed against her chest. Carlos Miguel sat next to her without a robe or badge, his hands clasped together and a serene look on his face. For the first time in a long time, he seemed at peace. Gabriella looked at him with a still fragile gaze, but with a new sparkle. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not giving up, for believing in me." He smiled crookedly, his eyes moist. "I just listened to what my heart was saying. Sometimes it screams louder than any rule." The baby stirred in her arms and she settled him carefully, kissing his forehead. "He has your smile," she said, looking at him. Carlos let out a slight laugh. "I think he got the best of both of us." For a moment, they remained silent, watching the people pass by, the children play, the distant sound of a balloon seller. Everything seemed ordinary, but nothing was ordinary there. Gabriella took a deep breath, looking up at the sky. "They gave me a new identity, a new name," she said softly. "But inside, I'm still the same." Carlos nodded. "Sometimes it's good to start over without the weight of the past." She looked at him with eyes full of tears. "And you, doctor? What happened to you?" He sighed softly and leaned back on the bench. "They fired me," he replied simply. "They said I disobeyed orders, that I put the hospital at risk." Gabriella lowered her head sadly. "I'm sorry." Carlos smiled, looking at the ground. "Don't be," he said, firmly and tenderly. "Life is worth more than any title." The silence returned, but now it was a beautiful silence. A silence full of peace, new beginnings, and promises. The baby opened his eyes as if he understood what was happening, and smiled a small but lively smile that made them both laugh. Carlos slowly ran his hand over the child's head and murmured, "Yes, I believe that life always finds a way to start over." Gabriella looked at him and shed a tear, but this time it was one of gratitude. "I never imagined that someone who didn't know me would fight for me." He took a deep breath, looking straight ahead. "Sometimes, Gabriella, you don't need to know someone to know they're worth fighting for." The sun was now stronger, touching the faces of the three of them. The scene was simple, but it had the weight of a miracle. A woman who came back from the dead, a baby who returned to his mother's arms, and a doctor who lost everything, but regained the meaning of his own life. Carlos slowly got up, looked at her, and said with a smile, "Serena, come on. There's still a whole world waiting for you." Gabriella smiled back at him. "Yes, but now I'm not afraid." And together, the three of them walked across the square slowly, in silence, but with their hearts full. If you were in Dr. Carlos's shoes, would you follow protocol or listen to your heart? Write HOPE in the comments and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next story.